You should start now.
Okay. Hari Om, everyone. Pranams. I would like to welcome you for the third lecture of this topic on Chatushloki Bhagavatham. So let's say our initial prayers. Om. 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 Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Vakratunda Mahakaya Suryakoti Samaprabha Nirvignam Kuru Me Deva Sarvakaryeshu Sarvada Saraswati Namastubhyam Varade Kamarupini Vidyarambam Karishyami Siddhir Bhavatu Me Sada. Satchidananda Rupaya Vishvotpatyadi Hetave Tapatraya Vinashaya Shri Krishnaya Vayam Numaha Samasta Jana Kalyane Niratam Karunamayam Namami Chinmayam Devam Sadgurum Brahma Vidwaram Sadgurum Brahma Vidwaram. Narayanam namaskritya naram chaiva narottamam devim saraswatim vyasam tato jayamutirayet. I invoke the God's grace and the blessings of the Guru Parampara, my parents, my elders, on all of us. And with this, let's start with this Chatushloki. We'll chant this first, this is actually the second Mangala Charanam, but it is most appropriate for Chatushloki Bhagavatam itself. Dharma projita kaitavotra paramo nirmatsaranam satam vedyam vastavamatra vastu shivadam tapatrayonmulanam. Srimad Bhagavate Mahamuni Krite Kim va parairishvaraha Satyo Hritya Varudhyate Trakritibihi Shushrushrubhistat Kshanat. So our lecture series is on Chatushloki Bhagavatham, and that is Bhagavatam in just about 4 concise, compact, pithy stanzas. And by now you would have guessed also what is really the theme of this Chatushloki Bhagavatam. It is about creation. So when we think about creation, this reminds me of a small joke. Once, a scientist and God got together, and the scientist challenges God to a contest of who can make a better human being. So God tells him, all right, I'm on it. Let's do it. So at which time the scientist, he was in such great delight, he just bends over and tries to pick up some dust to make his human being. Wait, God says, Leave this alone. You go and find your own dust. All this is mine. So sure, we can create too, right? As human beings, we can create. The only thing is, we just don't have the divine ability to create something out of nothing. We cannot create like what God creates. We can only create with something that is already there. For example, we can create a house, or we can even create a painting on a wall, or even a beautiful piece of music. So we spend a lot of time creating and also finding joy in all these creations. But have we taken the time to enjoy nature, which is God's creation? When do we find time to start looking at nature? So this is a question that can arise when we are ready to question. And people have questioned this in the past. They've questioned this from many different angles. They've questioned this from religion, they've questioned this from philosophy, tradition, mysticism, and even science. So while this doesn't look like, it's a problem from a scientific measurement, but scientists have come up with fascinating ideas and observations. The Big Bang, the concept of inflation, how about that, right? And the fact that most of this world is made up of dark matter and dark energy, which we cannot perceive. Of course, scientists cannot claim to know this definitive truth, but we can approach this question with a scientific mindset from even something like our own Chatushloki Bhagavatham. So it is believed that this great scripture, Smt Bhagavatham, is actually like a delicious nectar. This Bhagavatam, which has answers for all these questions, is like a delicious nectar. It is as sweet as kheer, as Ramakrishna Paramahamsa would say it. It's a combination of the sugar, which exemplifies devotion, the ghee, which is the energy of vairagya, and the milk, which represents knowledge. So you see, we have three in one: jnana, vairagya, and bhakti. All three are combined in this wonderful manner in this narration of this Bhagavad Purana. And as we said, this happens in the second chapter, in the 9th Adhyayi of Bhagavatam. And it is only about 4 verses, which typifies all this beauty of jnana, vairagya, and bhakti. And I want to share with you this other beautiful Mangala Charanam. In reality, actually, in Srimad Bhagavatam, you have 3 of the beautiful Mangala Charanam, of which the first one also gives a lot of essence, but which we will get to at some time. I shared the second one with you, which is the Dharma Projita Kshetra Paramo, that one. Now, this third one, which is Nigamakalpataror Galitam Palam Shukhamukhad Amritatrava Sanyutam Pibata Bhagavatam Rasamanayam Muhuraho Rasika Bhuvi Bhavukaha. So this beautiful Mangala Charanam, which is the third shloka in this Canto 1, it's essentially an invitation for all Rasikas, all of them living in this world. Nigama kalpataro palitam galitam, palitam galitam, which this Bhagavatam is a fruit, galitam, which is ripe through that teaching, which is For example, if you want heaven, prosperity, etc., then this nigama or is the kalpataru, which is the wish fulfilling tree of Vedas. The word Shuka is actually a pun. On one hand, it refers to Shukadeva, the sage Shukadeva, but Shuka also stands for parrot. As we know in India, whenever a parrot bites into a fruit, we know that that fruit is going to be extremely sweet. So too, the Srimad Bhagavatam, of which this Chatushloki is the essence, it is the fruit which is referred to here. And now, when we say fruit, it says Pibata Bhagavata Rasam. Pibata means drinking. So how can you drink a fruit? A fruit has all these seeds and all unwanted matter, right? But Bhagavatam is not like that. Bhagavatam is like a rasam, which can be just drunk. And it is drunk because of also it is a continuous flow. It is a continuous flow of jnanam, which has been given in the matter of Guru Shishya Parampara. And therefore, it is a beautiful rasam which all of us can drink. So I wanted to point that also as a beauty of the entire Bhagavatam, and which by listening to Chatushloki, which is just the essence, one may be tempted to go back and see the same essence of Chatushloki, the same nectar of Jnanam, Vairagya and Bhakti in all these verses. And that is Srimad Bhagavatam, which reveals the essence of the Lord and the spiritual means to know the Lord. We also talked about how sage Vyasa is the composer of this great Srimad Bhagavatam, which has been handed over. And the lineage, like we saw before, was Narayanam cha Brahmanam, Naradam cha Badarayanam, Shukam Parikshit Chaham, Pranamami Punah Punaha. So this essence of magnificent work starts by the question of Lord Narada to Brahmaji. And we see that Brahmaji going to Lord Narayana to ask about creation. So at the beginning of the material cosmos, Lord Brahma underwent penances for 1,000 years. And he was alone in darkness, seated on this giant lotus flower. There were no planets, no sun, and no moon. And being pleased by Brahma's penance, the Lord manifests Vaikuntha in front of him. So Lord Brahma is then able to see the Lord, and Lord Narayana then gives him the beautiful 4 Chatushloki Bhagavatam. Prior to that, we see that Lord Narayana tells Brahmaji, Jnanam Paramaguhyam me yat Vijnana Samanvitam Sarahasyam Tadangam cha Grahana Gatitam Maya. What does it mean? Jnanam, this Jnanam which is shown in Srimad Bhagavatam, is not like any objective knowledge. It is not like economics or finance, which is about wealth management. It is not like biology, which is like the science of living organisms, but it is subjective knowledge. Subjective knowledge, not objective knowledge. And therefore, Jnanam needs to be understood from a very, very vast scenario, not limited to all these secular knowledges that we have. So how to perceive this knowledge in the midst of this vast variety is what is Vijnanam. So Vijnanam is the experience of understanding this knowledge. And that one is, he says it's a secret because the secret is bhakti. As Sridhar Swami also says that, and this bhakti is how that this knowledge along with the experience can sink in. Secondly, Lord Narayana tells Brahmaji that this is not an activity. It is not something that you can experiment upon. Therefore, the only way to get this knowledge is by having exclusive attention. And he says, I am going to talk about this absolutely the highest reality, the highest knowledge, which I am. And therefore, you should know me as Yavanaham Yatha Bhavaha Tattva Vijnanam Madanugrahat Astute Madanugrahat. That is only by my grace you will know, which is Yavanaham, how big I am. Yatha Bhavaha, my transcendental existence, that is my Vyavaharik existence. You will also know all my qualities, the Rupa, Guna, and my activities, which is all connected with the transcendental transcendental existence. But I will also tell you the knowledge which is beyond that, which is knowledge of that absolute reality. All this you will know by my grace. So with that, Bhagavan, with us having bhakti towards understanding, and bhakti always is understood by the fact that I surrender my own ego at the feet of the Lord, and with that only this knowledge becomes very apparent to us. So surrender is an important attribute which allows us to recognize that I am not who I am, but for that Lord is who I am. So, and to receive that blessings in the form of this knowledge, love, and dharma, we understand what it is. So we started with this first shloka last time. Today, I plan to go through this in a little more detail because there are so many important concepts that can come out. Last time we went through mostly just the word meaning of it. Ahame vasame vagre nanyat yat sadasat param paschat aham yade tacha yo vashishyeta sosmyaham. So what does it mean? I'll just read the meaning and then we'll go through a little more in detail. So in the beginning, before the creation, I alone existed in my absolute state of being. Other than me, there was nothing else, no gross, no subtle, not even the cause of the gross and the subtle. Now, in the present time, I exist in the world, and what remains after its dissolution is me alone. So, Bhagavan Narayana says, Aham eva asam. Asam meaning was, Aham, I alone was. I alone was in the beginning. So how do we understand this statement? So let's take this pen, or let's take this book. When I say this is my pen, or this is my book, okay, there is something called as isness, right? So when we say aham eva asam, where asam refers past tense, it's not as if this pen just came out of nothing, okay? This pen was in the form of something, and that form is, we call that as an existence. It has to be existing. It was not something which is non-existence, right? So if we say it is non-existence, then really the whole game is over. So in order to say this, that if it is non-existence, then let's take this example of creation. So in creation, what Lord Narayana is saying is that aham asam eva agre. that I as existence was there, I alone was, and I alone was there, agre. Agre, the word can actually mean two things. One is in front of or in beginning. But here he's saying that in the beginning also I was there. So that existence is always there. It is not as if it's non-existence. Because if that was the case, then we would say that non-existence pervades everywhere. We'll be coming across a little later during this lecture on how there are some philosophies which talks about the fact that this entire world came from nothing or non-existence. But here we are saying that there was existence, and that existence is how we would say it's the isness of anything. And that isness is the aham eva asam, which is referred to here. Even in a simple thing, when we say father's genes and mother's genes, they are in children, we always say that the child came from the parents, right? The parents were the cause of the child. So if this cause was really non-existence, then everything is coming out of non-existence. That is also not the case. So this is an important aspect to keep in mind. Okay, if you alone was, before anything else came into existence, then when everything else became existent, that is paschad, later, we find that, does that mean that you disappeared? No. After everything came into existence, yat etat tat, even then I still remained. And I remained in the form of names and forms. How do I understand this? Let's take an example. When I go to sleep in the night and I get up in the morning, before we wake up and we say, where am I? So when our eyes are open and the alarm rings, the first thing is I think about it and I say, oh, I'm so and so. It just hits me that I live in Novi, Michigan. So meaning that even before I say that I am here and it hits me, the fact that I was there is logical, right? So I was there, and immediately that thought comes into me that I am so and so. So too, this line of yad sat asat param, nanyat sadya sat param, paschadaham yaditacha indicates that only when there's existence is there a possibility for having also the names and forms, right? So first aham is no birth, and the second aham means that I was there in the beginning. So sheer logic is now indicates what really aham here means. So if something then has a beginning, then it also means that something must have, or that something must have happened to make it happen. But we know that the self doesn't have a beginning and an end. Something must have happened to make it. When we say what is the cause for it, is that there are 5 theories here which we'll be talking about this, as to how we have different theories now trying to explain how, in this case, how did that something get converted into others. Another example to look into this also is, for example, a gold chain, okay? Now gold became the chain, or it appears to be a chain, but then if you look in and through the gold chain, it is nothing but gold, right? And gold itself became the chain. So we cannot really distinguish between gold and chain separately. So keeping in mind these examples that I just gave you about the gold and the chain, keeping in mind this also example of what happens as soon as I get up, let's look at a lot of these creation theories that exist and how does Lord Narayana explain this first, or Lord Narayana gave this example of a shloka, and we understand what it really means. So these are the 5 theories. They are the Arambhavada, theory of beginning, creation, very interesting. Parinamavada, or theory of transformation. Then we have the Anadivada, or theory of beginningless. Nastivada, theory of non-existence. There's a small spelling mistake there. Anadivada there, not Vadi. Vivartavada, or theory of superimposition. So let's take the very first one. How does this explain? Now, as simple as the shloka is, as I mentioned, it is just a pithy shloka, which means very compact and just the essence packed into it. On the face of it, it seems like I don't understand this whole thing. But in and through everything, you can see how our rishis have expanded, or the whole Smt Bhagavatham is an expansion of these 4 shlokas. So this theory, which is called Arambhavada, or theory of beginning, most religions, they accept this particular understanding. Basically, to say that God was always there, and God is the cause of the universe. And that is how the universe began. So there was somebody who was sitting there who decided that I'm bored and I need to start it. Okay. So that is one way of explanation of this. So when we say creation has a beginning, we have already now taken into account, I'm sure the scientists out there are going to look at it and say that, yes, there are 2 dimensions that is taken into account when we think about theory of beginning. That means something was not there and then it began. So when we say beginning, it has the 2 dimensions of, yes, time and space, right? So for example, if I take this pen, okay, this pen has a beginning, and either way, the way you might look at it is got one point and the other point, which is, you can say this is the start where the ink starts flowing, and as it goes down, there is an end of it, right? So this whole space which this thing is, it's basically the space. So that's one way we look at creation. Another thing also, when we say that, well, I came into this room at a particular time, so there is always a time element which denotes the start of something, or the space element which denotes the start or the end of something, right? So this is how an Arambhavada would argue this. And this is the case by even how science would look at something. Everything, there is a certain time that was needed, which is governed by time and space. So that is one way of looking at it. But we know through the Upanishads, for example, Upanishads have said that all these 5 elements of water, earth, water, fire, air, and space, all that is also, it's part of this energy, part of the matter. So how can this be one of the theory of creation, right? The second one is the Parinamavada. This is also something which one could look into creation, is that creation is nothing but a transformation. Okay, Parinama means transformation. An example that is always given for this is how a milk gets converted into curds. Okay, so that is Parinama, Parinamavada. Is that something that happened to the world itself? So that is another way in which creation could be looked at. But some people say that the world was always there. Why are we even talking about creation? There's no need for us to do that. You can never really explain this. Well, this is also something that any scientific reasoning will not accept it. And we know that with our theories, with Vedanta, that there is definitely a reason, there's definitely a reasoning. So Anadivada, which is theory of beginningless, also is probably something that cannot explain. And then we have many of the Buddhist theories which views that the world does not exist at all. Why are you inquiring about something that doesn't exist? So, 4 theories: the beginningless theory, the transformation theory, the theory of non-existence, and the theory of beginningless, the theory of beginning, the theory of beginningless, the theory of the four theories now we have looked into. Now let's come to how it is explained in Smt Bhagavatham and in this beautiful theory of Vedanta. This theory is the theory of what we call this as superimposition, okay, or Vivartavada. This is a theory which really needs to be understood, as I said earlier, keeping in mind the scientific way of rationalization and understanding how this world is constantly undergoing change. Last time I shared this beautiful definition of what this world is. Jayate tishtati iti jagat. That which continuously has a start and a finish, or which is continuously going, that is what is jagat, right? So this theory talks about how it is that it is neither was created at any point in time, nor has it changed from one condition to another, nor is it beginningless, nor does it not exist. So all 4 of them, what we talked before, beginningless, beginning, theory of, that it does not exist or it was always there. So it actually shatters all these myths. If we didn't have a good scientific understanding or thinking, we would just stop at the previous ones, right? But the theory that in Srimad Bhagavatam is propounded and in this Chatushloki Bhagavatham is essentially this theory of superimposition or Vivartavada. And I don't know how many of you remember this beautiful shloka from Atma Bodh, Samsara Swapna Tulyo hi Raga Dveshadi Sankulaha, that which is this entire world, this entire samsar is nothing like a dream. Samsara Swapna Tulyo hi Raga Dveshadi Sankulaha, which is nothing but made of just the likes and dislikes. So this creation that we're experiencing is like a dream. So long as we are experiencing it, we think it is absolutely real. Just like when I go to sleep and somebody gives me this big plate of samosas and I'm almost on to the 14th samosa maybe, and just then somebody wakes me up and I'm like, no, I want to go back to the dream and finish my 15th samosa. Is that ever possible? So we know that whole dream just happened in it was a figment of my imagination. So the same thing, if I spend a little more time thinking on how my waking world is, I can also see that these, just like a dream, it just comes and goes. So this is a standpoint of creation which is propounded here, that it is a projection and only an appearance. Okay. And this is called as Vivartavada or Vivarta idam vartate. There appears to be a lot of variety, but in a sense, that variety has come from one. Just like how in my dream, it is just me and me alone that has got transformed into so many different scenes, different scenarios. And so when I say that in this shloka, for example, when Lord Narayana says that aham eva asam, all he's saying is that I alone was there in the beginning. There was nothing else. There was no cause or effect. But I alone got transformed into this variety in the present world. Paschad aham yade tacha, and also the sat asat param. And we can actually analyze this by a couple other ways too. For example, if I am in a movie house, okay, and in this movie house, I'm looking actually at a wall. I'm actually looking at nothing but a projection on the wall, right? And this projection on the wall is how Lord Narayana explains how this I alone am. I alone am is none other than that substratum. Creation is nothing but that projection. And we know that creation here, when we say it's a projection or an appearance cannot happen without any substratum. And just like this movie, as I said, this is a substratum on which the movie is projected. So Bhagavan says, I am that substratum, aham eva asam, on which this whole world is projected. And another example which some of you might be able to relate to this as well is this example of a snake and a rope. When a person sees a snake, there has to be something there. One cannot just see, this is, I mean, when we are talking about this imaginary snake, not a real snake, okay? So in this imaginary snake, what happens is, obviously there is a rope which has a similar size, colors as exactly how the snake is. And therefore, the snake takes on that shape of the rope in my own mind. And that is how the rope becomes a substratum on which the snake is projected. So this has to be understood by the Lord himself taking himself to be the substratum to explain this creation. So the idea that I am the substratum shows that I'm only the substratum, that is aham eva asam, with respect to only the world, not with respect to the Lord himself. Like, for example, when I say I am the wife, then I'm a wife only in relation to somebody who is the husband, right? So the world is also relative. That's why I guess we're all called relatives, right? So the world is relative, and the substratum for the world is nothing but God. The substratum, when you look at this aham eva asam, the supreme reality, Lord Narayana, the Lord, that substratum presupposes that something is projected on it, which is this world of names and forms. When you look at this snake, and when you look at the snake and the rope, you see that, with the various striations and everything that is, all that is a kind of a projection based on how I think the snake is projected. If you were to ask a friend of yours who's walking with you and you say, oh, look, there's a snake, and you have to describe the two snakes, you will see that this description of the snake can be very different, already indicating that this world of names and forms is nothing on how my projection of this world is, right? So this is one theory this is a theory which is expounded here in Smt Bhagavatham, but also which helps to explain the appearance, it also explains how this creation really happens. So for somebody, we can say that how by just, like let's take even this example of a golden chain, right? If there's a golden chain, this gold is a substratum, and chain is nothing but an appearance on the substratum. Just like how we said the snake is an appearance, right? So if you want to take the chain out of the gold, what would remain? The gold, right? But if you take the gold out of the chain, there's also nothing, right? So too, if you take anything out, the matter, the whole world out of consciousness, which we're experiencing, what remains is nothing but that and that alone. A beautiful shloka from Ishavasi Upanishad, Ishavasi Idagam Sarvam, Yatkinche Jagatam Jagatim, which says that this entire world is nothing but that supreme reality. And this actually is very beautifully said even in Ganapati Atharvashirsham, Sakshat Samsakshat Atmasi Nityam. Everything that has come out is only from that Lord Narayana, that reality. And that is the highest concept which our Vedanta talks about, this entire aspect of creation and appearance, which is brought out in this shloka of Aham Eva Asam, Asam Eva Agre, Nanyat Yat Sadasat Param. So let's look at this Sat and Asat Param. Last time we went into a little bit of that detail on what this really means. So if you take Sat, the way it is understood here, Sat refers to all the gross names and forms. All that which, so this is Sat, not to be confused with the other Sat or existence. And that's why I'm calling that Aham Eva Asam as pure existence. And here Sat is nothing but that existence of gross subjects. So then what is Asat? One may ask. Is it something which is non-gross matter or non-existence? No. Let's take again this example of the pen. We know that this pen is made of, whatever materials, is plastic material and all that. But prior to it coming through, it was probably in the form of the much smaller molecules or anything. And prior to that, it was in the form of a design in somebody's mind, right? So too, we have Asat referring to the precursor to the formation of the gross materials. Okay, so you have the 5 elements which makes the gross, but then you have all the other design, the emotions, everything else that becomes actually part of the Asat, which includes the mind and intellect and memory, everything, emotions connected to the thoughts is the Asat. But there needs to be something which is even beyond this, beyond the Asat and Sat, which is the cause for Sat and Asat, and that is the Vasanas. Okay, the Vasanas which leads to the desire, which leads to finally the actions, that is Param. So in Gita too, it says, Avyakta Dini Bhutani, then Tatraka Paridevatam, Devana, which basically refers to the fact that this Param represents that Avyakta or the unmanifest, from which you have all this manifested gross and the manifested subtle. And so that is the Avyakta. Just like, for example, a tree cannot come out of nothing, right? The potentiality of the tree is there in every seed. the entire huge tree can rest in just a small seed. So, of course, the question may always come, which one came first, right? Whether the egg or the chicken. But just a small joke on this one is, if you were to ask which one came first, egg or chicken, what would be the answer? Well, if you're in a restaurant, you would say whichever you ordered first, whether it's the egg or chicken, right? So when we are in the cycle of creation as it is understood as in the form of an appearance, which includes the cause, the avyakta, which includes the gross, which includes the subtle, when we are in that cycle, it is impossible to say which one came first, whether it was the chicken or the egg, or in this case, whether it is the tree or the seed, or whether it is all this thing. So therefore, even in that way, we can recognize how that this is nothing but an appearance. So Sat, Asat, Param, all of them can be considered as part of the idam. And in the idam, there is always changes going on. But in that absolute reality, aham, there is no change. So we have two things, aham and the idam, which is all together. So Nanyat Sat Asat Param, we saw that Sat Asat and the unmanifest Param, which leads to both Sat and Asat. Paschadaham Yadet Acha Tacha, I myself was there and whatever else there is. Now, this is a fantastic concept which has come out in this beautiful shloka. And again, there is so much to learn here, just not by saying that it's names and forms, right? So aham, asam, I was again in the beginning, as we said. And then you had the gross, and then you had the subtle, which is the sat and the asats, which is the effects. And then you had the cause, which is the param. Okay. So all this, and when we say it is but an appearance, there is a name for it. And I know you guessed that what the name is. You're right. It is Maya. Okay. So that whole gamut of appearance, which is all the names and forms, that power which makes the gross and subtle and which makes the cause come into effect, that is Maya, which we called as the Param or unmanifest or Avyakta. Again, a beautiful shloka from Bhagavad Gita, Mayam tu Prakritim Vidyam, Mayinam tu Maheshwaram. So Maya is considered here as Avyakta Prakriti, or the unmanifest power of the Lord. And it is all these laws which are governed by this invisible presence of Maya and which makes things appear and disappear. A beautiful description of what Maya is in this Bhagwan Adi Shankaracharya's book called Maya Panchakam, Aghatita Ghatana Patiyasi. Ghatana Patiyasi, which is making it possible. So what is it that is made possible? And that what makes it possible is this Maya. Okay. Aghatita, which is impossible, impossible made possible. Sounds like a title for a James Bond movie or something, right? Impossible made possible. But that is what is Maya. Aghatita Ghatana Patiyasi. Another beautiful way of explaining this Maya is Yama Sa Maya. That which is not, but which appears to be. So here Bhagavan says that I was alone in the beginning. In the beginning, nothing was. But later when creation came, that is also me. So does that mean that Maya is Brahman? No. Maya is a power of the reality. From our standpoint, it is Maya. But from the Lord's standpoint, Lord alone is there. And that's what Paschad Aham Yadetacha. So I am there in the form of the Lord names in this in our own minds. So this Maya is what we could call as the material cause of all this Sat and Asat. Or another name that is given is Upadana Karanam, or the material cause. So a boy goes to his father and said, "Who created God?" Again, just another movie title here, Godfather, said the father. But that is, of course, not the case. It's not God's father, but it is that something which always was. So when we look at all this matter, then what would we say is the cause of matter? So the matter which is subject to change and all sort of these modifications, there has to be a cause for that. And that cause is actually this Maya. Okay. In Advaita Makaranda, there's another beautiful shloka which says, Aham asmi sada bhami, where he says, I, Aham, referring to that supreme reality, he shines everywhere. Okay. But I'm not that names and forms. And this is, we have seen some beautiful shlokas in chapter 9 and others as well, where you see that I'm not in them, they are in me. So Maya is again a power which is in Brahman, but that's one way of looking at this whole aspect of Maya itself. We'll cover much more about Maya when we come to the second shloka. I think I'll come to this just by introduction. I'll come to this again when I introduce this shloka of Maya. So the second shloka says, Ritertam yat pratiyeta na pratiyeta chatmani tat vijnat atmano mayam yatha baso yatha tamaha. So this shloka goes into detail about the nature of Maya itself. So Bhagavan says, one should understand this Maya, which makes the unreal thing appearing to be real, is just nothing but an illusion. An illusion just like, seeing a second moon. And I'll explain this further, which veils my being, even though it's always present, where this Maya is always present, like the planet Rahu. Again, a lot of words thrown in, some concepts thrown in, some examples, but we will try to understand this as well. So, Ritertam yat pratiyeta na pratiyeta cha atmani tat vidyat atmano mayam yatha baso yatha tamaha. So Maya is that because of which, when he says, which veils my being, because of which the truth, the absolute truth or the reality is not experienced, and that which really is not experienced, the self, it gets veiled and the world is perceived. So you see, what we're perceiving is the world, which is, we think it to be real, but that absolute reality is something that I'm not able to grasp. This is our Maya. In our worldly experiences too, we have such experiences. I already gave this example of the rope and the snake. We talked a little bit about the dream. The dream is, of course, not an example of It gives us a way to visualize what Maya is about. But then there are also other examples, like when I'm going in the dark and I see a post and I mistake that to be a ghost. Or when I'm walking on the beach and I see something shining on the beach and I look at that as nothing but a piece of silver or something, but I go close to it and I find it's nothing but a seashell. Another example of Maya is also this example of a mirage. We talked about it briefly last week, but that is also another example of mirage water on a heated sand. These examples of Maya. So in Smt Bhagavatham, we have the pure consciousness, which is called as Brahman or the Paramatman, Brahman, which is, you can call them Supreme Self, Bhagwan, Lord, all the examples. And there's a beautiful verse in this book which talks about how that is. Brahmeti Paramatmeti Bhagavan iti kathyate. So in Srimad Bhagavatam, we could call that Supreme Lord as Brahman or Paramatma or Supreme Self or Bhagavan. And that is nothing but that changeless reality, which is a cause for the world. But if we see a change, that change is all due to Maya, whereas that substratum is nothing but that changeless substratum. So why do I see this change? This change is because of the conditioning of the Maya itself in its totality, which is the cause of the whole world. So it means that due to Maya, this reality appears as the world, but it does not actually become the world. And in many parts of India, you can see that this word Maya is used quite loosely. Maya is used to indicate samsar. Maya is used to indicate relatives. Maya is also used to indicate money. So everything is Maya. And that is why I put this particular shloka here from Viveka Chudamani, which says, Avyaktanamni Paramesha Shaktihi Anadya Vidya Trigunatmika Para Karyanumeya Sudiyaiva Maya Yaya Jagat Sarvamidam Prasuyate. Yaya Jagat Sarvam Idam Prasuyate. This entire universe, as I mentioned, relatives, money, everything, this entire universe is nothing but it's projected as an effect. And it can only be known by someone who has a clear intellect. Karya Anumeya Sudiyaiva Maya. And this has no beginning, Anadi, and it is avidya, it is ignorance. And it is made up of the three gunas, Trigunatmika Maya. And it goes by the name of, we call it unmanifest or avyakta. Avyakta namni, by the name avyakta. And it is nothing but Paramesha Shaktihi. So, beautiful verse here. And if you were to break that up, as we said, avyakta means the manifest, and or avyakta means the unmanifest, which is the cause for that sat and asat, gross and subtle, and it remains in this unmanifest condition. That is one name for Maya. Another name for Maya is Paramesha Shaktihi. Paramesha Shaktihi, Isha Shaktihi, which is, and is Parama Isha Shaktihi. It is a power of the Lord, because of which the Lord is called the creator of the world. But in true reality, from the standpoint of Paramatma, you cannot call him as a creator. That's why this whole science of creation, as explained in Bhagavatam, is so interesting. From the standpoint of Bhagavan, he's not the creator. But from the standpoint of Maya, he's a creator. Anadya Vidya. Anadya Vidya is beginningless ignorance. Anadi, avidya. And this ignorance cannot have a beginning. It is not born of any knowledge. And that is why we say that the only antidote for Maya is nothing but knowledge. Only the knowledge of Bhagavan, only the knowledge of reality, only the knowledge of this changing appearance of this world can we really understand how ignorance can be destroyed. And it is also not born of non-existence. It is not born of void. That is why that other theory, what we talked about, which is a theory of non-existence, doesn't hold good. So it doesn't come from anything. Ignorance can happen only when something is not real. So Trigunatmika Maya. Trigunatmika Maya is again the three qualities, Sattva, Rajas, Tamas. Para, which stands for it's beyond the grasp of our mind and intellect. On one hand, I need the intellect to understand the knowledge, but knowledge doesn't mean liberation. Knowledge is only a means in which I can undergo liberation. Karya anumeya. So even though the mind intellect cannot know it, Maya can be inferred by its karya, which is effects. Jagat sarvam idam prasuyate. So all this entire world creation is nothing but by that power. So Maya is thus the creative power of the Lord. Ma means to create and Ya means that. So Maya is that which creates. So with that, we will pause at this point. So we saw what the definition of Maya is. We saw how Maya is that appearance, the total appearance, which includes the cause for that appearance, which is the Param, Asat, Sat. And we also saw how it is nothing but a power of that supreme reality. And that supreme reality or Brahman or Lord Narayana is the Aham. I alone was Aham Eva Asam. Asam Eva Agre. I was there in the beginning. If today I exist only in the seeming appearance of names and forms. And after this dissolution of this names and forms, I will continue to exist. So with that, we'll stop. Sarve bhavantu sukinaha, sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschid dukkha bhag bhavet. Om shanti shanti shantihi. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shantihi. Harihi Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om. If anything I said is not clear or if any more clarification is needed, please do send me a question or two, and I would be happy to answer that next week. Hari Om.